Patrick Penry here with a Trump 2020 election prediction, and this is a three-pronged prediction. Number one, I predict Donald Trump will be reinstalled for a second term. Notice I didn't say elected. Those Diebold electronic voting machines, the guy that makes them is a crony friend of George Bush. Do you trust him on the Diebold voting machines, especially with the recent bout of mainstream news broadcasts that say you can't trust the mail-in ballot? And Trump's even saying that too right now. Not that Biden's any kind of solution or alternative. Not at all. Not at all. But Trump will be reinstalled for a second term. That's prediction number one. Prediction number two. At that time, and maybe a little before that, but certainly after he's elected, he is going to begin to do the vaccine sell to his conservative base. Those are the ones with the vaccine skeptics. And he's going to begin to push for vaccination. He's going to say he's found a safe, therapeutic, effective vaccination that is good and healthy for you and your children. And he is going to hammer home your need to get this vaccination. I'm going to explain these predictions too in a minute. My third prediction, Trump in his second lame duck term is going to flip big on climate change. And he's going to say it's not a hoax, and that we need to be aggressive and take measures in quick, swift, aggressive manner, just as we did with COVID-19. And he's going to flip. He'll call a press conference, or he'll go on 60 Minutes, but Trump will be the first president to publicly say he was wrong and that climate change is not a hoax, and he's going to begin to sell climate change to his conservative Republican base. Now let's examine that conservative Republican base. They are vaccine skeptics, and they are climate change skeptics. If you look at the liberal base, what would have been Hillary Clinton's base had she been installed instead of Trump, they kind of accept the vaccines, and they pretty much accept climate change as CO2 as a cause, what the government, what the establishment says about both of those two issues. So liberals are not vaccine skeptics, and they're not climate change skeptics either. However, the Republicans, the conservative base, they are. They're skeptics, some of them anyway, are skeptics of vaccines and of climate change. So if you intentionally release a bioengineered virus, you don't want Hillary Clinton in office. You want Donald Trump in office, because Hillary would have a very difficult time of convincing the conservative Republican base that they can trust this vaccine and it's good and healthy for them and their children. Good luck having Hillary Clinton sell vaccines to the anti-vaxxers. But Donald Trump would be much more effective in doing so, especially if he's thought to be kind of the anti-establishment president. It's a good act, a good theatrical act they put on. So he's going to have to flip to sell those vaccines because COVID-19 was completely planned. It's mostly a money-making opportunity from what I see right now, and it ties into peak oil. There's a need right now, as easily accessible cheap oil is gone on Earth, despite what the television or the establishment tells you. Those days are over. And there is a need to lower population on Earth from 7.8 billion, which is way past Earth's carrying capacity. And there is also a need to suspend the activities of man, which would do what? Mostly conserve energy. Most of that would be what? Oil. A large portion would be oil. So COVID-19 fulfills a number of objectives for the deep state, for the global cabal. Now, they have to sell vaccines. They have to. They want to get to those anti-vaxxers and the conservative base, and Trump's going to begin to sell vaccines. And as far as the flip on climate change, you may not have noticed the white lines that have streaked the sky for 20 years. A lot of people are completely oblivious to a over 20-year long-term, large-scale geoengineering program. That is to say, they are intentionally modifying the environment, the atmosphere, trying to warm and hasten the melting of the polar caps, because underneath is a decent amount, I forget what it was, 13% or something of the Earth's oil is alleged to be under the polar caps. There's natural gas, there's gold, and it frees up shipping lanes. This has been a plan in the book since the 1950s. There is a precedent called Polar Experiment, POLEX, where Russian and American scientists work together to examine the ice, the North Pole ice, polar ice, and figure out how to melt the ice to access the oil, natural gas, and the shipping lanes. And ideas were put forth like detonating nuclear bombs and flying over in planes and spraying black carbon on the ice and so on and so forth. It's openly talked about in the 50s. Not anymore, They got real quiet about it, but they've been doing it for 20 years. That geoengineering program, right under your nose, blotting out the sky, there's a veil all the time. It's not persistent contrails. It is geoengineering to melt the polar caps. Now, here's why Trump has to flip on climate change. Because a lot of people don't believe him. And a lot of people know about geoengineering, and a few may know about the Polex and may know about the program to melt the polar caps intentionally, to hasten the melting of them, if nothing else. And so when you examine this in those alleged leaked maps that show the water rise, I think it's a leaked Navy or military maps you can look at online, that show you the rise from sea level rise from so-called climate change. That's intentional. That's melting the caps intentionally. They have to have a cover story for that. They have to call it climate change and blame it on you and me because of our CO2 emissions, right? Because if they told the truth, let's examine that. Let's say they call a press conference and say, look, we run out of oil. You can still get it, but it costs a whole lot, hard to extract, very expensive. Economy is crashing because of it. Our resource was finite. Those days are over. We should have transitioned in the 70s. Petrochemical corporations were greedy, said we'll do it on the last minute, on the fly. So we're way behind and we're in a predicament. We're having to melt the polar caps intentionally with this geoengineering program to try to get some more oil. We invaded Iraq. However you believe we got there. We invaded Iraq for the oil, took their oil, number 4 largest oil field, and a whole bunch of others in Iraq. We went into Afghanistan and took control of the lithium mines. We knew we would need that for the electric cars, electric batteries, the military's electric helicopter they're working on. Everything's transitioning slowly to electric. But now we're having to intentionally melt the polar caps, and the sea level is going to rise. I hope you guys don't mind. I mean, how's that going to go over with the American public? You can't tell them that. Can you imagine the litigation that would arise just from the people living on beachfront property that would sue Chevron, or would sue the military who's flying the planes and spraying, or who would sue BP or Amoco or some kind of petrochemical corporation? The litigation would be insane. And it wouldn't be profitable then to melt the polar caps to get at the oil, right? Just on that alone, the litigation that would arise in court alone, if you were honest about the geoengineering campaign. So clearly they have to have a cover story. They have to lie. And the lie is climate change. Well, it was global warming, but that didn't go over well. And then it was climate change, and that's not going over too well. And maybe next they'll call it environmental variances. Who really knows? So Trump has to come in on his second term, his lame duck term, and he's going to flip on climate change. And this is my 3-pronged election prediction. Number 1, Trump will be reinstalled by the deep state, by the global cabal. Number 2, he's going to begin to sell Bill Gates' vaccination. He's not going to mention the Fauci-Gates connection. I want to finish on that real quick. And third, he's going to come in and flip on climate change and say it's not a hoax. He has to. They're melting the caps, the sea level rise. They have to do it. Let's talk real quick about Fauci and Trump, and I'm going to go. The world's largest conflict of interest exists before our very noses right now, ladies and gentlemen, because Anthony Fauci is longtime personal friends with Bill Gates. He served on the decade of vaccines on the Leadership Council for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He was friends with Bill Gates' father on a first-name basis. And so when you look at this connection between Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates, Fauci being on the coronavirus task force, and Bill Gates being in the biotech, vaccine, pharmaceutical, that type of industry, there is a clear and flagrant conflict of interest of a size and scope we've never before seen. Now, I know the guy just came from Moderna to the Warp Speed vaccine task force, and that's a flagrant conflict of interest as well, especially when you read about him owning interest in Moderna personally. But the Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci conflict of interest is monumental. And I would like to take this opportunity to point out to you guys, no one seems to publicly want to broach this subject. No White House press reporter. They put on a great act, haven't they? As if they hate Trump and they're after Trump. But they never ask about Fauci and Gates. I mean, you'd really put Trump on the spot if you did that, wouldn't you? We don't hear any of this from Schiff or Schumer or Pelosi or even Biden, who is running against Donald Trump. In other words, the Democratic Party, they won't mention it either. They must know. They all know Bill Gates. Donald Trump knows Bill Gates personally. He's met with him many times. So the fact that the Democrats aren't touching this, Fauci-Gates conflict of interest. The mainstream news is not touching it. Most of alternative media will not touch it. Trump doesn't seem to care about it. You can't say he doesn't know. Do you expect me to believe Trump simply doesn't know that Dr. Anthony Fauci is on a first-name basis with Bill Gates? Because, hey, Trump's met with Gates many times. So I find that difficult to believe. And what makes sense, ladies and gentlemen, when you examine the Fauci-Gates conflict of interest and all these parties' avoidance of that issue, pretending it doesn't exist, that leads me to the obvious conclusion that they're all working together. I know you've seen the attempted impeachment with the Russia election collusion, so on and so forth. That was an incredible theatrical performance. I told people the whole time, no one's going to be impeached. This is to divert and distract you, but now I see it was to make you think they're at odds with Trump. They are not. Because if they were at odds with Trump, I tell you Biden would come out tomorrow and an ad would run on TV that said you can't vote for Trump. He put Fauci head of the coronavirus task force. He's longtime friends with the Bill Gates family and Bill Gates. Bill Gates is in the vaccine industry. You can read all about it. He stands to make billions. Like I say, we're going to make Bill Gates the world's first trillionaire out of this because Donald Trump seems to be okay with that. So Biden's not using that against him. The Democrats won't touch it. The news won't touch it. And Trump seems fine with it. Folks, it proves a theatrical performance of a size and scale we've never seen or could conceive. They're all working together. And here is the absolute proof. Because election will come and go. You will not hear about the Gates-Fauci connection anywhere on TV, nor from any Democrat, nor from Biden, nor from the mainstream news. Trump won't do anything about it. And that tells me, folks, they're all working together. And it also makes me ask this last question. I'm going to go. Does Bill Gates and the communist Chinese government own Donald Trump and my government and the Democrats and the Republicans? I'm asking this question because somebody does. They work for somebody, and it ain't the American public, folks. All right, Patrick Penry, I've kept it under 13 minutes. That's it. I'm going to go play some Modern Warfare and have some fun. See you guys online. I love you guys. Stay safe. Take care. Don't let them fool you. Right now, this time, you can't vote. There's no one to vote for. Patrick Penry, over and out.